Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Charlotte's Control by Maggie Sims, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. William Stanton, heir to the Earl of Harrington, guffawed at his cousin Percy's latest tale of late-night antics. The group of young men occupied the corner of William's first ball. At 9 and 10, just home from his second year at Oxford, he was an unusual sight at formal events. He'd hoped to have until he reached his majority before giving in to the formalities of society. From the corner of his eye, he caught a few heads turning toward them at the loud laugh. Their small group was drawing attention from the row of seated matrons against the ballroom wall. Still chuckling, he turned his head and froze, gaping. Standing alone, an iceberg with the sea of ball-goers flowing around her, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. A cliché, perhaps, but undeniable. Unlike the married ladies in chairs who leaned toward each other to gossip, or the twittering nests of girls new to the marriage mart, this creature was solitary and serene. Her plum-colored ball gown stated that she was married, but she appeared closer to his age than that of those lining the room. The honey curls pinned high on her head gleamed with youthful luster, unlike the gray streaking most of the mammas' heads. She was also staring back at him, her expression unreadable. His mouth was still open from the laughter he had stopped mid-breath, and he snapped it closed, straightening an inch and squaring his shoulders. He pivoted to face her fully, even as one of the other young men in the group nudged him. She arched a brow before breaking eye contact and turning to peruse the dance floor. Percy's friend, whom he had met an hour ago, asked, "Who's the lady? Do you know her?" "Not yet. Who do you think I could introduce me?" "I have no idea. Our host, I suppose." He had just been introduced to the Earl whose home they occupied that evening, so he could not waltz up and ask about a woman who could be a duchess for all he knew. Disheartened, William turned back to the group of young, mostly idle aristocrats in his cousin's set. Balls held no appeal to him. He'd rather be out with his childhood friends than making small talk with strangers, and he was years away from hunting for a wife at such events. He had planned only to gain introductions to a few members of the House of Lords who Percy knew, lingering just long enough to do his duty. Thanks to his father's irresponsibleness, he was trailing his cousin around, learning the politics of an earldom for the remaining weeks of the parliamentary season instead of the usual post-matriculation activities, like a grand tour or frequenting gaming hells like most young aristocratic men. He was lucky his mother had salvaged enough funds to get him through the next year to graduate Oxford. At some point, he would need to think of marriage, if for no other reason than to replenish the family coffers. But after a mere hour at one ball, he'd become bored with the vapid misses in pastel. They simpered and primped, opening and closing their fans and peeking at him in some mating ritual he neither cared about nor understood, until he'd spied this paragon of poise. The goddess who stood apart did not flutter or flit, nor did she whisper to a companion behind a fan. Composed and confident in her solitude, she held herself apart and observed. What must she make of the yapping pile of earls in the making he lingered with? Did she see them the way he viewed the girls his age? Only she could answer that question. He broke away from his circle and strode through the crowded room toward where he'd last seen her, determined to forego propriety and introduce himself. Spying a flash of purple skirts disappear around a tall couple who'd just arrived, he maneuvered in that direction. A simpering miss, apparently feeling quite daring or the effects of the champagne, stepped into his path and fanned herself like it was an Olympic sport. He sidestepped. She matched it. Sighing, he bowed. "I beg your pardon, miss. I was looking for a friend, if you'll excuse me." Turning, he found a different path to the ballroom entrance and peered at the stairs where the ladies' retiring room lay, then at the front hall and door. The lady had vanished. He hadn't seen her speak to anyone, and he could not even ask someone her name. Gritting his teeth, he returned to Percy to learn his duties for the future. He'd ask his cousin about her tomorrow, or his friend South would have ideas. South was always creative at circumventing society's rules. William woke early the next morning, as was his routine. Throwing clothes on without a cravat or jacket, he made his way to the library to meet with his mother for an hour before breakfast. Entering just after him, hair a shade lighter than his due to gray streaking the gold, she stood almost as tall as him. They shared the same long, lean build and not easily ruffled demeanor, unlike his sister, Emily, who was younger by 3 years and took after her father in creativity and temper. William contemplated his mystery woman's age. It was likely midway between Emily's and his mother's, but just as his mother did not look her age, mystery woman's appearance left a wide margin for error. His mother grabbed some documents from her desk and moved to the seating area, the rust cushions and curtains offset by touches of yellow, a thick patterned rug with similar colors beneath them. Mama, what do we need to accomplish today? Who did you and Percy meet last night at the ball and the club? He and his cousin had headed to White's after the ball to discuss the bills currently under review in the House of Lords. An off night for Parliament was most often used for squiring wives, sisters, or daughters to a ball, or looking for a wife depending on one's situation, following by political machinations at White's, one of several private men's clubs favored by peers of the realm. William ran through the members he had spoken to and the topics covered. When he had arrived home last week from university for the summer break, he'd been looking forward to continuing to learn the earldom bit by bit and spending evenings with his closest friends. Instead, his mother had pulled him into the library, brackets around her mouth indicating her worry. William, I have had to step in and keep an eye on things. Funds are tight. We have enough to get you through university, but I need your help in maintaining the business of the earldom, please. His father's overindulgence in drink had been apparent to everyone for a long time, but he had not realized it had become that out of control. In the blink of an eye, his summer plans were forgotten. His concern was for his mother and family, as well as the dozens of servants and tenants who relied on the earldom for rent and food. Mama, you know, if you need me, I'm here. I'll stay. I can finish Oxford later or read the books in my own time. She hugged him. I know you would, my son, but I do not want that for you, and there's a limited amount any of us can do with your father still the Earl. He nodded. But how will you manage when I'm away? Summer break is less than 2 months. Percy is 23, if you recall. He's been managing his own household for 2 years, and before that was learning in preparation to manage it. He stops by and helps me. We review whatever paperwork we can before Fred awakes. Then we review the most important items with him at breakfast before he leaves for his club. And just between us, I've had to sign for your father on a few things. Even if he was asked, he would not recall whether he'd signed something or not. Her eyes shuddered and the grooves around her mouth became more pronounced. Mama, I wish you had more things in your life that made you happy. He'd make it all go away for her if he could. After their initial conversation about expediting his learning, he'd noticed how tired she'd looked. Before, she'd just been Mama. Now she was his business partner and his responsibility as much as he was hers. My boy, you make me happy. Her smile chased the tired look away, at least for a moment. Knowing you'll finish university and be ready to take your place in the world thrills me. I see so much strength and compassion in you. You are already a gentleman I am proud of. Her words strengthened his resolve to alleviate her burden as much as he could. Right then, how can I help? Thus began the summer of shadowing his mother and his cousin to safeguard what he could of the earldom and its coffers, while other young men his age learned from their fathers. His father was lucky he was not around much. Once William saw the shambles of the family ledgers due to mismanagement and poor investment, his ever-growing anger might have gotten the better of him. This morning, his mother's question about who they met brought back his plum lady in a rush. He needed to find time to discover her name and station. William, are you all right? Coming back to the present with a start, he shook his head. Sorry, Mama, did you ask me something? Did you meet the Earl of Peterborough? I do not believe so. He ran through the names and faces to whom his cousin had introduced him. Shall I send him a note asking if he'd be willing to meet me at White's one morning? That should work, she nodded. As I mentioned, I have heard his politics align with ours, despite Peterborough having quite different industries up north. But tread carefully. Consider taking Percy, as he has more experience in these matters. As usual, his mother's request came more like a demand. He was accustomed to it and did not mind. She was more intelligent than many of the men he knew and was juggling her role as a countess with having to be Merlin to his father's sodded King Arthur. William's strength of character came from her. Stifling a sneer for his father's weakness, he wrote the requested note, specifying mourning to avoid his father, as the man rarely rose before noon, and William avoided interactions with him as much as possible. When Percy arrived, he'd bring up the subject of the gorgeous mystery woman. Percy hadn't known who Plum Lady was either. Frustrated, William sped through his work and granted himself a reprieve to spend time with his two closest friends. He'd met South and Nate at boarding school. The day was gray but dry as he strolled the few blocks to Luke Linwood's family townhome, also in Mayfair. Luke, or South as they dubbed him in opposition to the title he'd one day inherit, was heir to the Earl of Northumberland. From South's, they grabbed a hack to get to Nate's forge. Nathaniel Follett neither lived nor worked in Mayfair. Nate had not been a student, rather he'd been the son of the other boys' housemaster. The student surmised that he'd know how to have the most fun in the area, as well as how to circumvent house rules and not get caught. The three quickly grew close. William helped Nate with his last years of studies before apprenticing to learn a trade, and Nate helped them borrow boats to row on the town's lake, among other activities to expend some of their youthful energy. The unlikely trio had been separated the past 2 winters, with William and South attending Oxford, while Nate journeyed to London to pursue an apprenticeship as a blacksmith. Now South was in London for a fortnight before his father planned to adjourn the family to their country seat, giving the three a limited time to reunite. While the other two had been at university, Nate had formed a partnership with Robert and Beth Orford to make leather and metal accessories for sexual play. The income from that allowed him to need only 1 year of apprenticeship before saving enough to open his own shop. The smith Nate apprenticed with had used a play on his last name and his hobby, crafting intricate items like nipple screws, and dubbed him Folly. Despite his teasing, he'd been very supportive of Nate's growth, introducing him to the Orfords and helping him strike out on his own. The smithy was located in Soho, located just to the east of Mayfair. The neighborhood included a mix of businesses, immigrants, and working-class folks who lived above their storefronts, as Nate did. Aristocratic visitors were infrequent, but not unheard of, given the goods and services offered there. Clambering down and paying the hack driver, they strolled in to find Nate hunched over the fire with the smallest tongs in his hand, droplets of sweat sizzling as they hit the flames. "Oh-ho, it seems Folly's finished his real work for the day and is making more toys," South mock whispered to William. "My hands are full, but please consider yourself gestured at rudely," muttered Nate. "I am nearly done." "Will you show us the piece if we wait quietly?" "Not a chance in hell you'll succeed at that, so no." William snickered and promptly received an elbow jab to the ribs. "Hey now," South faked outrage, but strolled around patiently. "Don't. I know, don't touch anything," South finished Nate's oft-spoken warning. 10 minutes later, William and South reclaimed their favorite corner of the public room while Nate ran upstairs to rinse himself off and put a dry shirt on. Mugs in front of all of them, South asked again, "What were you working on?" "You know I'm not going to share until I am certain the pieces are finished and usable." The Orford partnership and resulting catalog were Nate's passion, and he was protective of their designs. William's few sexual encounters had been quick, half-dressed, and rare. He'd only dallied with serving girls who threw themselves at him at school and was still at a loss as to what all the fuss was about. The girls were eager and seemed easy to please. While he enjoyed himself, he wasn't all that interested in prolonging it with contraptions. Anyway, he had more important things to worry about. "South, did you see the lady in the plum gown last night?" "Plum?" "Purple," Nate clarified, rolling his eyes. "Why do you both call it plum when purple will do just fine for any self-respecting man?" William gritted his teeth. "Did you or did you not see her?" "Nah, I had my eye on a cheeky little miss in yellow. Oh, excuse me." South searched for a word. "Lemon." "Wait, why do you want to know?" Nate turned to look at William for an answer as well. "She caught my eye, but when I looked for her to introduce myself, I could not find her. She was intriguing." He was not going to tell his profligate friend that she'd been the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, as well as the most composed. "Well, if she was wearing plum, then I can see why. Sounds like a perfect opportunity for a dalliance with a matron for the summer before heading back to university." South wiggled his brows. Nate interjected. Why do you assume that? The marriage-minded misses are all in pastels. It's like marking them for slaughter. Lovely, Nate said with a snicker. What do you suggest? William was about to knock their heads together if they did not stay on the point. Send a note to the host, South offered. And ask what exactly? William huffed. Attend more balls. Nate's voice was matter-of-fact. Ugh. Although he'd be attending them anyway, at least the hope of seeing her and actually getting to talk to her would make them more palatable. Perhaps Plum Lady would be at the Earl of Cheltenham's ball. Percy had said it was one of the most widely attended.